And then came, I was feeling so good until the next day I read a good news story from China. And they report good news, but what they call good news is sometimes scarier to me than the bad news, okay? And here's the good news. The Chinese call it flammable ice. And the Chinese have made great progress in technology. And it looks as if they can reduce the cost of extracting what they call flammable ice from deep under the ocean. The technical term is clathrates, methyl hydrates. And this is a huge source of energy. There's so much fossil fuel locked up in the bottom of the ocean, it could keep the fossil fuel economy going for another 100 years. But the best estimates say you get 10 to 20 times as much greenhouse gas per unit of energy if you use this energy source. And if you continue this for 100 years with 10 times the greenhouse gas, if this happens, I think we are dead. And it is happening. Now, I wonder, why is Xi Jinping letting this stuff happen? Xi Jinping is paying for one group doing wonderful things with solar power. He's funding another group that does great things with electric cars. But then there's this other group which is working hard to kill the whole human race, because this clathrate technology has the potential to make the warming bad enough and continued enough that if I combine it with the trends here, my gut feeling is now about the same as Peter Ward's, that if we don't change something, we're dead. So we are in a race. There are advanced renewable sources like the solar power we discussed here on Earth and space. There are lots of ways we can generate energy. We don't need these clathrates. We don't need them at all. But China has people who just want to make the most money they can. I don't know what the Communist Party has to say about it. Maybe the Communist Party has turned into a public relations outfit for their oil industry, because that's what it looks like. They are working hard and effectively to develop a technology which, in my view, really does threaten the very existence of the human species. And maybe it's in a 100-year time frame, but it looks like a really serious danger. So after I saw this, I said, okay, we're not out of the woods. We might live, we might die. We don't even know the probabilities. We need to work hard to find out. But we also need to develop these competing technologies so that this kind of stuff doesn't overwhelm us. The methyl hydrates are things I studied long before in the energy context. When I studied it, it was pretty much the consensus that about 10 to 20 times the greenhouse gases get to the atmosphere. When I read this latest report from China, there was a guy connected to the oil industry in Canada who said, "You environmentalists, you shouldn't freak out. Don't you realize that the greenhouse gases that are coming out here, like methane and other combustible gases, they could be consumed by bacteria in the ocean, maybe, before they reach the surface." He said, "Doesn't that reassure you?" Well, I know what these bacteria are in the ocean, and it does not reassure me, because when they do combustion, if they can use this kind of stuff as food, that means they're pulling oxygen out of the ocean to do it. And some of these guys may be the very archaea we're worried about. So their solution may actually be a bigger problem. It may be a way to get proliferation of bad bugs before the oxygen runs out. They're going to get rid of the oxygen locally. So it might be that instead of Chile and California feeling the first stink, it could be the South China Sea. Because if they start gobbling up oxygen and the bugs start proliferating around these clathrate sites in the South China Sea, we're toast. I might add that there's a connection here between this biology and the BP oil spill. I don't know if you remember. Everybody was surprised. I mean, BP did not want to have its oil well explode. They didn't want that to happen. It violated all their projections. What was it that they missed in their model that made them think this thing wasn't going to explode in their faces? And what they missed was the biology. They missed the archaea. And some archaea produce methane, some produce H2S. But my understanding is the BP crisis, the collapse, was due to unexpected biology. They weren't accounting for the archaea. And that's the problem with the clathrates. They're not accounting for most of the biomass of the ocean and what it can do to you if you do the wrong thing. Well, before the Chinese started their major program, there was a lot of research in different places around the world. Canada was certainly one of them, where they worked hard to evaluate different technologies to extract energy from the clathrates. My understanding of that research was that it all would produce these greenhouse gases. And you might debate how much is in the ocean, how much gets to the atmosphere, but the 10 to 20 times production was what I saw in all of the serious reports. But the serious reports also said, thank God it's so expensive. Okay? To do it right, maybe it would be even more expensive. They're not going to do it right, frankly. They're in it to compete with the money. If the Chinese lower the costs enough to be able to sell the stuff, well, you're going to see mass deployment. And that's what they're working for. That's what a big group of people is planning to do in China. And they have a way to improve the technology which lowers cost, but the same emission problem exists. And you know, supposing you could cut the problem in half. Instead of being 10 to 20 times as much greenhouse gas over 3 times as much time, maybe it would only be 5 times as much. My gut feeling is that's still enough to get us to an H2S collapse. Our lives really are in danger. I don't know how soon. I mean, God help us if the West Antarctic thing collapses the wrong way next year. It could be much sooner than I thought. I don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. And we really ought to be studying this stuff more effectively to find out, to answer the question. But it seems pretty clear that if we don't find an alternative to this clathrate stuff, we are very much at risk of losing the whole species. That's my impression. That's the best knowledge we have today. There is a serious risk to life.